Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. So for this episode, I want to talk about something that comes up a lot, especially with clients, and it also comes up a lot when I, ask you guys on Instagram for requests for podcast topics or listener questions. And basically that is, if I eat a lot in recovery, will I get used to that and have to end up eating that amount forever? So people often ask, well, does my stomach stretch out from eating so much in recovery and I'm going to need to eat tons of food forever to feel full? Or if I'm eating when I'm not hungry, wouldn't that mean that I'm going to develop a habit of just eating all the time? And basically this fear that by eating generously and freely in recovery, this will somehow translate to bad habits around food in the future when you're recovered. So, does our bodies get used to eating more? And does eating more means that we get used to it to the point where we need more because we ate more in recovery? The answer to that is no, but partly yes. So let me explain first with the yes part. When someone is increasing their intake, it is completely normal that in the beginning it feels like a lot of food. And as you keep going, you gradually get used to eating that amount and it doesn't feel like that much food anymore. Not only do you get used to that amount just mentally, but also physically, your body adapts to the increased intake by increasing your metabolism. I remember in early recovery eating literally just still a very, very low amount, but a little bit more than I usually did. Felt like me eating a lot, and it felt I was feeling very full, but also very hungry at the same time. I was feeling just like, oh my God, I'm eating so much, right? And then eventually I doubled and then tripled my intake from that. And even though that was a lot more food than I had in the beginning, I noticed that I kind of became used to it, right? It felt normal to me to eat like a generous portion of food. And metabolically speaking, what we see in people in recovery, or especially people who have been in recovery who have increased their intake, because this is important to say, someone can technically, quote unquote, weight restore if that is needed, or technically, I guess, recover in some way or another, eating quite a low intake, but they won't have the metabolic repair. So someone who is metabolically healing, basically increasing their intake in recovery, and healing that metabolically suppressed state, getting the body out of that state in recovery, and recover in a decent intake, basically. Yes, some of these people, or actually quite a lot of these people, will need a slightly higher than, I guess, normal or higher than before intake just to maintain their weight after recovery, usually for 3 to 6 months-ish. This is due to the temporary metabolic rise after recovery, which is pretty common. So basically what's happening is you're eating more, your metabolism goes up, your metabolism stays elevated for some time after recovery, and then it gradually normalizes. So when I went from meal plan to intuitive eating, it was not necessarily that I went in to actively cut down drastically on my intake. It was more that I was eating more intuitively. And I actually found that I still needed quite a lot of food, I was still probably not too far from the 3,000 range also eating intuitively because my metabolism was increased and it was just the amount that my body actually told me to eat. But then with time, I noticed that I was still hungry and I still ate quite a decent amount, but I probably ate slightly less than I did. And then other people expressed that they actually just keep eating quite a decent intake, right? So it really depends from person to person. But usually when people talk about this fear of, getting used to a certain intake, very often it is not about a fear of their metabolism rising and them needing more food for a prolonged period of time. Very often that is actually something that people express to me as something desirable, something they want, right? Usually when people ask this question, it's about a fear of, quote unquote, getting used to eating that amount and eating more than you, I guess, quote unquote, need for a prolonged period of time. So it's just something that tends to happen, if you're in recovery, you're eating quite a decent intake, you're pushing yourself to eat beyond your fullness cues because you need to hit a good intake. Would that translate to you developing a habit of consistently eating to beyond the point of fullness? So here's the thing. You might think that because it seems where you're doing something, it becomes a habit. You're always eating to be on the point of fullness, right? You're not going to get in touch with your hunger cues. But actually, very interestingly, it tends to be the opposite thing happening, right? The best predictor to have out of whack hunger fullness cues after recovery is by under eating in recovery. When I see people who are, they have recovered or they're in some kind of quasi-recovery state and they struggle with, eating to beyond the point of fullness, not being in touch with the hunger fullness cues, pretty much every time they come from a past of restriction, right? They were not letting themselves eat freely and intuitively in recovery. They were actually restricting their intake and constantly under eating in recovery. So it's actually more common that the state of undereating leads to the overeating rather than overeating leading to more overeating, right? I know this can seem strange and counterproductive, but it actually has to do with certain mechanisms in the body that regulates hunger and fullness. So there is actually biological basis to this as well. I also think there is a bit of a psychological basis to it, but let's talk about these factors at play. So let's start with the biology. I'll try and simplify it. So basically, the way our bodies work is that we have certain, sensors, certain mechanisms put in play to regulate our hunger and fullness and regulate our weights, regulate our natural set point weight range, basically. The problem with dieting is that it kind of tries to hack these mechanisms, right? So your body may have a natural set point range that it's thriving at, but if you're constantly trying to hack that, that can be thrown off whack. This is also part why prescribing dieting as quote unquote weight management is seldom successful, right? Because you're trying to fight something that is just very ingrained biological things in your body and actually helps throw it out of whack. This is why you see people go on a diet, they lose a bit of weight and then they gain it back with more, right? Because there are metabolic adaptations, there are adaptations in your hunger fullness, and then there are also certain psychological things that are happening when you treat food like a scarcity, right? Which I'll get back to in a bit. So basically, when you are eating a generous amount in recovery, and yes, this for many people includes eating to beyond the point of fullness, eating even when you're not hungry, right? What's essentially happening is that you help your body restore these natural mechanisms that control hunger fullness, because you're showing your body that, hey, there is no famine, right? A lot of this excessive hunger people experience when they are, struggling with, chronic overeating, yo-yo dieting, binge purge, that hunger very often is actually rooted in your body detecting that there is a period of famine and then setting off certain evolutionary adaptations to famine, right? To increase the intake, get you to eat more. It's pretty logical, right? Your body has noticed that, there's not a lot of food coming in. That is not great. Let's now put in these mechanisms to get you to eat more, right? And sometimes with eating disorders, especially with anorexia, it can sometimes translate more to a psychological hunger rather than a physical one, or it can be a combination as well, where you are instead feeling hyper-focused on food, right? This is a form of hunger. But basically, your body is seeing that there's not a lot of food coming in, so it tries its best to get you to focus on food and eat. It tries to make food as exciting and rewarding as possible, right? This is why you see a lot of people who, again, when you talk to people who are overeating, in so many cases, I think pretty much every case, or at least most cases I've seen, there is also some element of restriction there, right? Because the restriction makes the overeating more appealing. It's kind of like when you're very, very sleep deprived, sleeping. You just imagine you're super sleep deprived. Maybe you're at work or in class and you're so tired and all you can think about is just a soft, nice, warm bed and just laying down. It's just so rewarding. It is so rewarding because you're sleep deprived, right? If you had a very good night's sleep, then the thought of actually going to that bed wouldn't be as tempting, right? Same thing goes if you're dehydrated, when you're out and about in the summer, super thirsty, all you can think about is just having a soda or a glass of water. You're programmed to focus on things that you deprived yourself from, because essentially your needs aren't being met, and then your body is really trying to get you to meet those needs, right? It's so logical, yet the eating disorder will throw all of these mental gymnastics to try and tell you that this is not normal, that you are somehow greedy or faulty for experiencing these very natural biological adaptations to famine. So in recovery, someone is eating more, they're pushing their intake, eating to beyond the point of fullness, trying to hit a reasonable goal, or they might be experiencing extreme hunger and eating quite a lot, quite effortlessly. what essentially is happening there is your body is detecting that the famine is over, right? It's detecting that, oh, we don't need to send out these food signals forever, right? It's noticing that, oh, okay, actually there's food coming in here, right? And then when your body trusts you enough and realizes that food is coming in, you're not going to deprive it. And this is an important detail because sometimes people may be able to have like a day where they're eating very freely, maybe extreme hunger hits, they're eating well, but then the next day they panic and restrict again, right? And then wonder why they keep, why doesn't this food obsession or this quote unquote overeating go away, right? You need to be consistent. You need to get your body out of the famine state and also get your body to a weight that is within your body's natural set point range. So yeah, you're normalizing your levels of ghrelin. I never say that hormone correctly, I'm sorry. I just always mix it up if it's ghrelin or ghrelin, but basically hunger hormone. Leptin, which also controls appetite, also controls body fat storage. So you're normalizing all of these hormones, and these hormones biologically help you regulate your hunger and fullness. But if you never get the restriction out of the equation, your body is not going to be able to let you feel fullness because it wants you to keep eating because it's detecting there's a famine. And it's like, oh, food is scarce. Whenever there's food available, we need to eat and save up as much as we can until the next period of famine, right? But then by eating a generous amount consistently, you're telling your body, it's okay. We can rely on hunger fullness cues now. There's going to be food available and your body is adapting accordingly. Think of it this way, you're really burnt out, you've had a hard time at work or school or whatsoever, and as a result, you fall asleep and you sleep for like 10, 12 hours, like longer than you normally do, right? Are you going to panic that, oh well, if I actually sleep and rest up, I'm just going to get addicted to sleeping and I'm going to be used to sleeping this amount, I'm going to want to sleep this amount every time, right? No, you just know that your body temporarily needs this because it is exhausted, and then as you start, if you actually rest up, avoid sleep depriving yourself, then you're going to go back to more what is for you a more normal amount of sleep, right? And of course, also sleep amounts depends from person to person. Some people need more sleep than others, right? So this is another thing, like that normal word sometimes should be thrown out, right? For example, I'm someone who sleeps quite a lot compared to a lot of other people because that's what my body needs, in part due to my disabilities. And equally, some people may need more food than others, right? Some people may need that very, very large, portion of food to feel satisfied and for their body and metabolism to be happy, right? So don't focus too much on normal. Focus on what's normal and feels good for you, right? And I also want to talk a bit about psychological factors as to why, this whole thing where if you eat a lot in recovery, you're going to get used to eating that amount forever, why that doesn't really hold. So basically, I see this over and over and over with clients when they're eating more intuitively, freely, and especially if extreme hunger hits, right? In the beginning, it's so exciting. Like, it's terrifying, but it's also so exciting, right? All of the foods are really like, oh, maybe like they haven't allowed themselves to freely eat certain things, and it becomes so exciting, so rewarding. But then as they allow themselves to do it repeatedly, it becomes a little bit less rewarding, right? This doesn't mean that it doesn't taste good, right? Like, I love pizza, for example. Pizza is amazing. I still love to eat pizza, and if I'm really hungry and I have ordered a pizza, it's always like exciting to wait for the pizza to come, right? But it's a completely different kind of excitement. I don't feel like a thrill when I eat pizza, right? It is more just like, oh, that was nice. That was what I wanted. And then after eating it, I'm over it, right? But if I had decided to ban myself from pizza, I would have put pizza on this pedestal. And then every time I was able to access pizza, I would have just been like, okay, this is my one chance to eat pizza. So I'm just going to eat, 5 pizzas instead of 1 or 2. And the truth is, in recovery, this is very often what we need to do, right? We need to allow ourselves to eat all the pizzas, right? Even though it seems objectively like a large amount. And part of it is just because we need to kind of rebelling against eating disorder. Just eat all of it, right? Because by actually allowing ourselves to rebelling against these rules that you can only eat X amount, then these rules kind of lose a bit of their power over you. If you tell yourself or teach yourself that you actually have unlimited access to the foods you want for as much as you want, for as long as you want, etc., it kind of becomes a little bit less exciting, right? I don't obsess about pizza because I know that if I want pizza, I'll just order some, right? It's not like a massive deal to me. But during my eating disorder and also during the start of my recovery, when I was still kind of getting used to, having that food freedom and introducing new foods, it became this obsession, right? And I put pizza on such a pedestal where I was scared that if I allowed myself to eat it, I would just completely lose control whatsoever. And yes, in the beginning, eating some of these foods became very messy and weird. And that's what it needed to be, There is system in the mess sometimes, right? I needed to eat pizza a bit chaotically for some time in order to actually develop a more, sane relationship with it, right? I needed to take pizza off the pedestal, and that included a lot of pizza eating. So I feel like in recovery, a lot of people have that specific food that they put on a pedestal. A specific could be like for instance, I mentioned pizza, but it could be literally any food that they have put on this pedestal, and they're terrified of letting themselves eat unrestricted because they may have had experiences. They've been banning themselves on food, and they may have experiences where when they are faced with that food, they feel like they can't control themselves around it and just eat. And when I work with clients, very interestingly, what I often do with clients is actually working on implementing this food as much as possible, right? I think ideas about, this is a food I can't control myself around, so I need to not eat it, is just completely counterproductive. So instead, when I have a client who, for instance, let's use pizza as an example, have that as this fear food because they can't control themselves around it, and they think, I actually say, okay, well, how can we implement as much pizza as possible in your everyday life? Actually give them that unconditional permission to eat, including that food that they're scared of, right? And time again, when I do that, people develop such a peace with that food, right? Such a peace with that food. At first, it's just like, oh my God, I'm going to be addicted to pizza. I'm going to want to eat pizza for every meal for the rest of my life. I'm just going to it's just going to be pizza forever. Yet what I see is that eventually, as people allow themselves to eat unrestricted of that food, have unrestricted access to that food, it's not that they develop a habit of always eating that food. They actually develop a more healthy, sane relationship with it, right? Because they take it off the pedestal. And this doesn't mean that when you allow yourself to eat a food, you're going to automatically not want it, For instance, I was really afraid of chocolate. And then as I started implementing chocolate, I decided that I really like chocolate. And I started having every day with my coffee, I started having some chocolate. But it was more that I was able to, have some chocolate, snack on it without obsessing over it in the way that I did in early recovery. So before my recovery, when I had chocolate available, I would binge and purge on it, right? And recovery meant that I was able to just have the chocolate. Sometimes I'll have a few squares, other times I have the whole package, and I wouldn't feel any particular way about it. But in order to get to that point, I also had to, prior to that, go through the point of eating it messily and unrestricted, right? I had to go to the point of buying myself bars and bars and bars of chocolate and just eating it. And then by doing that, I didn't develop a habit of eating 10 bars of chocolate every single day. Instead, I developed a more relaxed relationship to chocolate, where sometimes I wanted a bit and other times I wanted a lot, right? But I also didn't stop eating chocolate. I still love chocolate. I still eat a lot of chocolate. But you can see the difference between the relationship I had with it then and the relationship that I have with now. So I don't want anyone to listen to this and think, well, shit, I feel so addicted to pizza, so I'm going to just let myself eat it so that I never want to eat it again, right? Because that also implies that there's something wrong with certain foods. But overall, putting foods on pedestal just makes them way more exciting, right? And food is fun. There's nothing wrong with enjoying food. But also, with something gives you a lot of excitement, sometimes it can also give you a lot of anxiety, right? Because excitement and anxiety can be quite similar emotions, right? And I think the problem with a lot of treatment practitioners in the field of eating disorder is that they treat this rebellion phase as something undesirable. They treat it as, you're going from one eating disorder to another, we need to control this, right? And trying to control this rebellion tends to really backfire, right? It's a little bit like, think of someone who's grown up very, very conservative religious home, right? Very often what you see is that if they allow themselves to rebellion, they really will go all out. I know this for a fact from the people that I know that grown up very conservative and religious. A lot of them, when they kind of allow themselves to rebellion, they rebellion very extremely, right? And growing up, I grew up very, liberally in terms of how I was raised. I was allowed to do kind of what I wanted. My parents were not keeping an eye on everything I did. So I remember I actually started drinking and partying at quite a young age without facing much trouble for it. And it was interesting because on one hand, I'm not saying that this is a good thing, absolutely not encouraging minors drinking. Please don't think that's what I'm encouraging, right? Because it's not, and it was of course not healthy or safe or anything like that. But one thing I did notice is that because I was kind of allowed, or like not allowed, but like they kind of turned a bit of a blind eye on some of my behavior, I noticed how not exciting it became when I was older, right? So when a lot of people turned 18 or became a bit like in their teens, 20s, partying was just so much fun for everyone. And I was just like, it's no rebellion for me, right? And a lot of the reason why people found partying so fun was because it was a sense of rebellion, right? But because I've already done the rebellion thing, it was just not that exciting for me, right? Also, I don't like partying, but that's a different story. And a lot of the same goes with food, right? A lot of the same goes with food. If you see eating chocolate as this massive rebellion, as this massive like, it's going to be more exciting and also more scary than if you just see it as I'm just having some chocolate, right? But in order to get to the stage of chocolate being just chocolate, you need to go through the rebellion stage, right? Very often people think that they can just skip this stage, right? They think that, oh, I'll just be normal, right? Oh, I hear this all the time from clients. I'm just going to be normal. I'm just going to be normal. Like, we want you to get to the point, but actually to get to the point of being quote unquote normal around food, you probably would have it to be in a bit of an abnormal stage, right? Equally, if I'd never done my rebellioning when I was younger, I probably would have been rebelling at a later age, right? So as I said, in order to find peace with the food, you first need to accept that there might be a bit of chaos around that food. In order to get to the point where having, some chocolate in the fridge, you have it when you want it, but you also know that you can have chocolate in the fridge without feeling like you need to eat absolutely everything at the time, right? Sometimes we crave that. Sometimes I have chocolate in the fridge and I just eat everything because I wanted it, right? But you get what I mean. You get what I mean. Like, I remember during my eating disorder, I was terrified of having specific foods in the house because I felt like I couldn't, quote unquote, control myself around them, right? And now I'll just have foods that I enjoy in the house and eat them whenever I want. But yeah, in order to get to that point, you have to go through the chaos point. You have to go through very often the point of eating it, kind of what feels uncontrollably. And I sometimes feel like eating disorder practitioners, some, not all, but some neglect this, and they're instead encouraging like, oh, well, if you can't control yourself around chocolate, let's just remove the chocolate, right? But this is not good because this keeps chocolate on the pedestal and it keeps it having control over you. And I think if restriction had shown itself to be an effective choice here, then, would have solved it already, right? I just haven't really heard people say that, oh yeah, I solved that problem by restricting myself or banning foods. So please don't feel shame for going through that, I guess, rebellion stage. It's completely normal. And no, it is not like you will rebellion forever, right? Now it's like, why? Yeah, I do actually at this point have some chocolate in my fridge, but I kind of crave it for a little bit later. I don't want it right now. Why would I rebellion? It's no rebellion for me to eat it now. It's just like, okay, like it's just no rebellion. It's the same way that going out and drinking right now, drinking alcohol wouldn't be rebelling for me. It wouldn't give me any kind of like feeling like I was rebellious, or because it's just not on a pedestal, right? So overall, trust the process, accept that there is stages to the process. Each of the stages are very, very normal. Think of, I often think about recovery as a bit of a second puberty. Like it can literally physically be like a second puberty, but also mentally, right? Because you're rebelling against the eating disorder. And that requires a lot of opposite actions. And sometimes it can feel chaotic. Sometimes you feel like, oh God, is it going to be like this forever? But sometimes it just needs some chaos in order to completely like shake off the control. You need to maybe go a bit in the other way with a lot of chaos, a lot of lack of control in order to get to the point where it's more peaceful, right? It needs to be, the people often say it's quiet before the storm, but maybe we can have it the other way around. It's stormy before it's quiet. And last but not least, in terms of like stomach expanding, no, this is not really how it works, right? Because a lot of people think that, well, my stomach is going to expand because I'm eating so much and then I'm going to physically need a certain amount to, I guess, fill myself up. So here's the thing. Our bodies are actually quite smart. Our bodies don't really... this is the thing, people often think that physically filling up your stomach is going to send you hunger or fullness cues. But if it was that easy, you could just drink a bunch of water and then be full. And very often what I see with people with eating disorders is that they actually take in a lot of liquids. They're filling themselves up with like a lot of liquids, high volume foods such as vegetables. So their stomach, it's not necessarily that the volume always is the problem, right? And yes, some people with eating disorders have their stomach is kind of, what can I say? It will stretch out a bit in recovery because restriction has made it kind of, go a bit smaller. Yes, that's normal. But the stomach is not like It's not something that just expands, right? It just expands to its, I guess, normal size, and then it stays there, right? So no, eating a generous amount of food in recovery, including giving into extreme hunger when it passes and eating till you are very, very full, is not going to cause some kind of permanent stomach extension where you're going to need an extreme amount to feel physically full. That's not how stomachs work. Our bodies also know the difference between filling yourself up on vegetables or water versus energy-dense foods. This is why you feel very different when you have, for instance, a plate of vegetables with a big glass of water versus if you have a plate of pasta with a smoothie or a milkshake. The latter stays longer in your stomach, and it also sends signals to your body that, hey, yeah, there is energy in this, right? Again, we can't outsmart our bodies with volume. But one thing that can be helpful is that if you're someone in recovery who feel very, very full, it could be worth focusing on more energy-dense foods that are lower in volume, give you more energy for the volume, right? So maybe skipping eating like those massive portions of vegetables and instead having the pasta, which is lower in the volume but gives you more energy. This can help that excessive feeling of fullness some people may feel. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and now I'm going to take a listener question. So the question goes: I'm pretty early in my recovery and I struggle with food guilt quite a bit. I grew up in a household that's really focused on diets and health, and my parents have always looked down on people who genuinely enjoy food. I know that it would be the right thing to do to honor my mental hunger, but I don't have physical hunger, so my eating disorder is telling me that I'm using recovery as an excuse to eat a lot. Do you have any tips on how to deal with the aftermath of that upbringing and overcome thoughts like this? So part of the work here is to unlearn ideas about food that you have, picked up on from your home. We often speak about unlearning diet culture in terms of the societal impact, unlearning that messaging, but sometimes that messaging can come from our very own families. And you know what? It does take work. And it is difficult for me to give you like a 1-minute answer that will completely make you unlearn things that has taken you years and years and years to pick up on, right? But I can tell you that that work is possible. And one thing that can be helpful is to kind of try and separate what are some ideas that you picked up on from your family versus what would be the healthy, non-disordered option or alternative to that. We often talk about, eating disorder self versus healthy self. What does the eating disorder say and what does like the healthy you say, right? But you can also do this with your family and thinking, what are some of the ideas that I picked up on? Maybe writing them down and then writing what is actually the truth here? What is the non-disordered alternative to that? And I know sometimes it can be difficult to filter. Yeah, but what if my family is right though? But try and think, well, does that view of seeing food that way actually help you? Does that benefit you to hold that belief? Don't think about whether it's right or wrong. Think about, does it help and support you? And chances are, if you have an eating disorder, those beliefs don't benefit you in any way. It doesn't help you in life, right? So why would you hold beliefs that aren't in alignment with who you want to be? So overall, work on unlearning those beliefs and think of it a bit like in the same way that people talk about unlearning diet culture, think about unlearning family beliefs as well. So in terms of your lack of physical hunger, but just feeling mental hunger and feeling like, oh, I'm using recovery as an excuse to eat, I hear this a lot. People are terrified of, oh, I'm just using recovery as like an excuse to eat. And that's kind of like, oh, I'm just using feeling tired as an excuse to sleep. Like what? No, wait, what? Recovery is not an excuse to eat. It is a reason to eat, but you don't need to be in recovery to need to eat. In the same way that you don't need to be exhausted and sleep deprived in order to deserve to sleep. As human beings, we literally deserve food and rest. Literally, we're put on this planet for that. Any other, living being is, or at least most will eat and rest, right? It's just such a natural thing. It's just like, do we deserve to breathe? Do we deserve oxygen? Do we need to hold our breath in order to deserve to breathe in oxygen? No. And in terms of using recovery as an excuse to eat, I hope that this podcast episode actually answered a bit of that, that fear of, well, if I just eat a lot in recovery, I'm just going to get used to it and feel like that forever, right? So I hope part of your question was maybe answered in this episode. But one thing that I can remind you is that mental hunger is hunger. So often people think, well, I'm not physically hungry, but I'm mentally hungry, but the mental hunger is somehow less valid than the physical hunger. but it's not. It is completely valid. So very often your physical hunger cues are kind of given up a bit, right? Because you've been ignoring them, or you haven't really been in sync with them, right? So what is happening instead is that your body focuses on mental hunger. It can be in terms of food obsession, thinking about food, planning food excessively. This is a form of hunger. And what I see time and time again, when someone gets out of the undernourishment stage, the mental hunger also reduces. And it's very common in early recovery, and also recovery in general, to feel more mental hunger than physical hunger. But this can also swing and fluctuate. Sometimes people feel physical hunger but no mental hunger. And sometimes people feel both. Sometimes people feel nothing, right? It is all normal. So try not to overanalyze your hunger, because very often what's actually happening is the eating disorder is looking for reasons to stay overdue, is looking for reasons for you not to eat. So your eating disorder goes on this kind of mission to try and almost debunk your hunger. It goes on this like intellectualizing mission, like, okay, we need to figure out what is this hunger in order to actually eat. You need to almost feel like you need to reassure yourself that it's real somehow in order to eat. But this is just the eating disorder. You don't need to go and psychoanalyze your hunger in order to eat. You just need to eat. Because trust me, even someone who has they're extremely hungry mentally and physically will still come with some kind of psychoanalysis why it's not real hunger and why they shouldn't eat, right? Because your eating disorder is never going to find an answer that it's happy with, right? It's always going to find a reason as to why some restriction is a good option for you. I think the good news is that you actually don't need to unlearn all of your family's beliefs around food in order to eat, right? Sometimes people think that they need to do all the work, all the unlearning in order to actually do recovery. But I would actually argue that the best thing you can do in terms of unlearning these beliefs is by going for recovery and doing what feels wrong. When I say that it could be good to work on unlearning these beliefs, this does not mean work on unlearning these beliefs and then recover. It means recover and work on unlearning those beliefs as you recover. People have all sorts of beliefs, some weirder than others, right? And we cannot live in alignment with other people's beliefs because there's so many different ones. Everyone has different ideas about food, about everything really, right? We can't live in alignment with that. You need to see what are your beliefs, what works for you. And the good thing about recovery is that recovery can sometimes, really improve your relationship with food. This is the weird thing, right? I feel like my relationship with food and body is actually a lot better than a lot of people that I know that has never had an eating disorder, just because I've unlearned so much bullshit and I really have been learning to be in complete alignment with my body. So try and see recovery as a golden opportunity of unlearning, right? By actually just doing recovery, by eating, even though it feels wrong, noticing the benefits of it, sometimes delayed benefits, because sometimes you feel worse before better, can actually maybe teach you more than anything else in terms of unlearning your beliefs that you have kind of adopted from your family. I hope this was a helpful and interesting episode, and I will also keep taking listener requests of topics. There are a few things that have been requested a lot of time, and I promise you I am working on creating episodes on those topics. And those topics are like dating and eating disorders, dating in recovery, and just dating in general. That comes up a lot. And also this fear of faking your eating disorder. Oh, that comes up so many times. Just from listeners, from clients, like, I'm just faking my eating disorder. I think I'm faking it, very, very interesting thing, very interesting concept that comes up a lot. And another thing that's been highly requested is an episode kind of aimed towards those around the person with an eating disorder. I've done an Instagram live about this. If you go on the letsrecover.co.uk, if you look at the videos, Instagram lives, I've done an Instagram live on supporting someone with an eating disorder. It's like a 2-part video. I think I'm wearing like a white shirt in the video, and like my hair up. But I will definitely create a podcast episode that's specifically touching upon that can be used as a helpful tool for parents, friends, partners, etc., for someone with an eating disorder or just someone who wants to know a bit more. So yeah, keep the episode suggestions going. Keep an eye on my stories on Amalie Lee or at letsrecover.co.uk in terms of, because that's usually where I collect listener questions and where I take suggestions for topics. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you guys have an amazing day and week, and I'll see you again next week.